Here at Urban Auras, we pride ourselves on timely and relevant opera. That's why.
My goal for this conversation that I'm having with you and with a few other people involved in the project is to show that there is more of a connection between the arts and the military than people think. We like to think that they are two very separate, never the twain shall meet kinds of groups of people. But I've been amazed in putting this conversation together, how many artists have military connections, how many active duty and retired military have arts connections. Mm-hmm. So it's, I love bringing disparate groups of people together in surprising ways. And so I'm thrilled to be talking about this with you guys.
One of the things I think is that if we look at the roots even of theater itself, you go back to very ancient Greek plays, they all involve military heroes and conflict and the very essential human experience of going to war and bringing people back from that experience and trying to reintegrate them into society. It is one of the great questions, I think, of humanity and human society. So in a way, it is completely logical that then in opera, which is this genre in which we explore deep human experiences and deep human emotions, that we should turn to exploring this question. And even in early opera times, if you look at the work of Monteverdi or other, to think of The Return of Ulysses, which is one of the most beautiful early operas, and a piece that I've directed, it deals so beautifully and appropriately with so many of these issues and feels so modern. And I actually directed early in my career a production of it where I set it as the shell-shocked dream of a World War I soldier, using myth to try to explain what happened to him, because I think that we're always going back to these myths and these ancient stories to try to explain what's happened to us. So there's this very natural connection. In modern times, as we've begun to make operas that want to feel like they are relevant to people today, of course, we've been engaged in tremendous conflicts, and we're still trying to figure out what we think about the conflicts of the 20th century. And it makes total sense that exploring soldiers coming home with PTSD and what happens to their families and these stories that we unearth would be great and fertile ground for opera. It's about society. It's about all of us, the wound for everyone of what it is we ask people to do, and then how we treat them and try to help them when they come home, or how we fail at that. And these are all sort of the essential questions surrounding it. If you're interested in essential life-defining, life-altering human experiences, of course, this is one that you turn to.
Yep, Brian Barsanti here. I serve as the executive director of the Southern Museum of Flight. I've been a part of the museum team for about 15 years. I've worked in a number of capacities here at the museum, directing educational programs, giving tours back in the day. I've done restoration on our artifacts, sold stuff in the gift shop, sold admission tickets. I cleaned bathrooms, scrubbed floors. I've done just about everything there is to do here. And then in 2014, I took the helm as the director. So I've been in my current position now. I think I'm going into my 8th year here pretty soon, which is kind of hard to believe.
I'm Keith Wolf Hughes, General Director of Opera Birmingham. I joined the company in January of 2015, so I've been here a little over 6 years. And in my time with Opera Birmingham, we have worked to expand not just what we do, but how we do opera and performances to be a more engaged part of our community. So while we continue doing some of our traditional repertoire, We have also worked to expand the types of performances we do with pop-up concerts, with smaller chamber pieces that allow us to tell stories that are more relevant to our community here in Birmingham. And that is where, that's how Brian and I met as we were exploring one of our productions that had a military subject. We wanted to find partners that could help us tell that story, not just to tell the story of the opera, but to engage the community and go beyond what happens on the stage to talk about, in this instance, the military community in Birmingham and the work that our community is doing to support the military and their veterans. From the start, Glory Denied is a powerful story, and the music enhances the power of that story. And it just takes you on this emotional journey of what Colonel Thompson and his wife were dealing with, not just while they were separated, but as they were, reintegrating life together after 9 years. Doing it in that space, added another layer to the experience. But for me, I think one of the reasons it is one of my favorite productions I've ever been involved in was that, story around the story. We worked with our community foundation and received a grant to provide tickets to veterans and military families to see the show. So to see, that story being told for those who have lived through, probably not the prisoner of war aspect of us, but just the separation of military families go through. And then the conversations afterward, it's one of those small world situations. One of the performances, there was a retired nurse in the audience who was one of the nurses who helped take care of Colonel Thompson when he came back. And it's one of those things, we could never have planned it. And it's why I think for us it's important to do these kinds of projects, is that we're telling stories that people in our audience have lived through in some way, and hearing those stories around us are just as important as what's happening on the stage. And we can talk about this a little bit more. It's those opportunities then to work with some of our other community partners and talk about things that are not the opera, to talk about, in this instance, suicide prevention and the work that our VA hospital does with PTSD treatment. And the community here has a really cool arts and medicine program, and how the arts can be used as a healing tool.
Someone seeing their story on stage, I think, cannot be diminished.
Right.
It's just, and to let people know that we want to tell their stories, that we want to see them and know more about them, and help them if they need it, or just celebrate them or honor them. That's something that the artists can give out to the community. I think that goes that way.
One of the things that I started to do at the beginning of the pandemic was I was asking our artists for ideas for projects that could be presented digitally, because that was really the only way that we were able to produce anything, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. And one of our artists brought an idea to me of producing a work that had been written, but hadn't yet had its premiere, based on the trial of Susan B. Anthony. And it was a one-woman show with piano. And I said, this is perfect. This is the perfect project. And I started pitching that idea to companies, and I was able to bring 5 companies together to produce digitally the world premiere of this piece. And I directed it and did everything that there was around the production, including finding the space, finding the pianist, finding a cinematographer, just everything. And it was an incredible project, and it just received a lot of attention. And I felt really good about the work that I'd done, and thought, I really enjoy this. What else can I do? And so I started to try to think of other ideas for projects. And that was a commemoration of the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment for women to be able to vote. And so I just Googled 2021 anniversaries. I literally Googled it. And I happened upon the fact that 2021 was going to be the 100th anniversary of the dedication of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And I said, this is it. I said, something has to be done to bring attention to this anniversary. And that's how I came up with the idea. And then I started presenting it to some friends. The first being Michael Mays, our wonderful baritone who's on the project, who's an artist that I've known and worked with at ADA for the past 16 years. And he has done a lot of projects around veterans, around those stories. And he calls it opera with a conscience, which the idea of doing something around the celebration of the anniversary of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier is really poignant to me because I am a military brat. My father was an infantryman, service for his career, was an infantryman in the Army. He did 3 tours in Vietnam. And he and I visited the tomb at one point, and we watched the changing of the guard. We also visited the memorial for Vietnam. And I remember specifically my father walking to a certain point on the wall and just touching it and looking at me and saying, these were my men. And it's a really profound experience. And it meant a lot to me to be able to do something that brought attention to the people who serve and those who fight specifically for our rights. I think as artists, we tend to take for granted a little bit the fact that we have this right to express ourselves. And I also think that oftentimes, not always, but there are times where what we may be expressing is at odds with a lot of the people who fight for our right to be able to express it. They don't agree necessarily with what we're saying, but they will fight and they will die for our right to say it.
For one, the tomb is not a story. It is a universal symbol of this, and so you're gonna make me cry. It is a universal symbol for the sacrifices that our military and their families have made on behalf of our country. And so that in and of itself, I don't know that it matters where the tomb is. It is what the tomb represents. But for me, the other part of that is, as a former opera singer myself, I think what makes our art form powerful, or what makes all art powerful in general, is we are telling a story that has, you know, a universality to it. It might be, like with Glory Denied, a very specific person's story, but beyond that is the story of sacrifice, and not just Colonel Thompson's sacrifices, but Alice's sacrifice and the family sacrifice. For this tomb, for this project, what I was so excited about was it's not just a story of a soldier who might be in the tomb, but the guards, the families. I have been fortunate enough to see the tomb a couple of times, and it is so powerful that, you know, I think that in and of itself is why our audiences will come. And then there are some unique connections to Birmingham that I didn't know. I'll let Brian share I'll prompt him if he doesn't bring it up himself. But within the veterans community, and then doing this on Veterans Day, there are some unique connections in Birmingham that make this an even more special event. So I'll use that to throw over to Brian.
Yeah, and you're right on from the beginning. You know, with the tomb itself, over the years since the end of World War I, it's become a focal point for Veterans Day celebrations, commemorations, Memorial Day commemorations. Heads of state visit the tomb on those respective days. You know, the president, and we've created this focal point. But he's right on. It also becomes a personal reflection tool, right? Going back to what we thought about regarding what we do in the arts for the military community, we're providing our own focal point here. We're providing the opportunity to reflect, so to honor, to pay respect. to reflect ourselves in our own ways. Like Keith mentioned, visiting the tomb there at Arlington, I've had the opportunity as well. And when I stand there and I'm reflecting, I'm thinking about my own experiences, those who have come before me. I'm thinking about the families of those who have lost loved ones, the families of those for whom the tomb represents, those who are unidentified. I read an article recently regarding a guard, a sentinel at the tomb, and he was reflecting too about what it meant to him. And he talked about being there at a time when families are mourning the loss of those from Afghanistan and Iraq here in recent decades. And when they come from that respective section over to the tomb, they're showing emotion. It's still raw, it's still fresh. And he mentions in that interview that those that are lost, didn't just lose their lives. They've lost their identity as well. The unknown soldiers, airmen, Marines, sailors, and the families have lost as well. And having that that inability to account for the loved one, to find that kind of closure, it's almost like he was saying that he's able to substitute and provide that some sort of closure for them. It might not be complete, but in some way, shape, or form, he's able to do that in carrying out his duties as a guard.
Well, one of the things I knew when I first looked at the songs was that I wanted to advocate for the idea that Taylor Raven, the one woman in the cast, would sing the opening song about what it is to be a soldier thinking about deploying. I did not want her to sing the second song, which is about somebody who is left behind, because that is usually the story we tell about women. But of course, that is not the story of today's military. That is not the story that we have not told yet about women who serve. And this is a gap that I thought we could just, very slightly begin to fill. And I'm fascinated with women who serve and leave others behind and what that choice is.
One of the things about this particular subject matter that I felt was really important was that it was something that everyone could relate to. During this time of extreme divisiveness, here was a subject matter that hopefully anyone would be able to relate to. But at the same time, on the other side of that is that unless your life is personally touched by someone who's in the service, if you know somebody who's in the service, if your family has a member in the service, or you have a good friend, if you're personally touched, then it really affects you. If you're not, in some way, they are all unknowns. And when that struck me, I started thinking about all the other unknowns. And Marcus, in his words, just really captured this so beautifully. And I'm just going to read what he wrote. He wrote, "How many storms have gone unnoticed? How many more downpours deserve our attention?" And this just speaks so much to me of the unknowns that we don't talk about. Because we have the unknowns who are those who are in the tomb, those that we don't know their names. Those are those who died in service. But there are so many more unknowns who are lost to us, that they come back and we lose them to drug abuse. We lose them to homelessness. We lose them to suicide. And they are unknown. They're the ones you pass on the street. All of the unknowns that this piece is for, and that our lives can be touched by through this work. And hopefully those who view this work will take a moment to reflect on not just those who lie in the tomb, but the countless unknowns that there are, who have given everything.
Here at Urban Arias, we pride ourselves on timely and relevant opera. That's why.